We're now on Tzadivav Amid Beis. Va'ika Misgarto. How can you tell me that the whole length is 15 tfachim? There was Misgeret, there was a frame that was put on the table, and the Lechamim were on top of this frame. And that would certainly add a certain height. So now we have a machlokis where this frame was located. Was it below the tabletop or on top of the tabletop? Kiman Diomer of Yochanan maintains, like that opinion, that Misgarto Lamata Haisa. It was below the table. So we're calculating the 15 tefachim from the table. The Misgeret, right, the frame, what's it called in English? The frame was below the table. So the Gemara asks the following. Uleman Dior Misgarto Lamala Haisa, but if I hold that the Misgeret was on top of the table, which would mean that you'd have to add to the length. So the answer is Pirkude Havi Mefarkida. The Lechem Begavi the Shulchan Havi Yosef. Again, a very technical point over here. Let's see if we can figure it out. So again, we're going according to the Omer now that the frame was on top of the table. But it was bent upward outside the tabletop. The Lechem Gabi the Shulchan, obviously. If I understand correctly, what we're saying is that the Lechem was on one side and the Misgeret was on the other side. So even if the Misgeret was on top of the Shulchan, but nevertheless it didn't have any impact on the Lechem because the Lechem was on the other side. Let's see what he says. He says the Lechem rested upon the Shulchan, not upon the Misgeret. Thus, the Misgeret doesn't add any height to the Lechamim. Kedesanyas, we learned in a Brisa. Again, this Brisa is going to reflect the opinion that the Misgeret was on top of the Shulchan, but yet the Lechamim did not sit on that side where the Misgeret was. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Lo hayasham snifim, ela Misgarto shel Shulchan ma'medes es halechem. So this is a new sheet of Rabbi Yossi that rejects a lot of what we've been talking about until now, and he denies that there were snifim. So if he denies that there were snifim, right, that would, hold everything together, then what would hold them together? And the answer is the framework of the Shulchan that we said there was a Misgeret. Ma'medes es halechem would support the lechem, so you don't need snifit. The frame was only a tefach high, and could not have supported more than one single loaf. Evidently, Rabbi Yossi holds that only the bottom of the loaf needed support, not any of the upper loaves. Amrulo, so they responded to Rabbi Yossi, Misgarto lemata hoisa. Anyway, they disagreed, and that was what we said, Kimandio Misgarto lemata hoisa, but Rabbi Yossi himself holds that the frame was on top of the table, and it replaced the need for the snifim to support the lechem. Clearly, Rabbi Yossi holds that the lechem lay within the frame, but not upon the frame. Okay. Omer Rabbi Yochanan, L'divrei Omer misgarto lemata hoisa. Okay, this opens up a whole new dimension. Now we're learning taharos. So you can close the faucet of kodshim and open up the faucet of taros. L'divrei Omer misgarto lemata hoisa, which is Rabbi Yochanan's opinion that the frame of the shulchan was below the tabletop. We're going to learn from this and derive a conclusion about Kabbalah's Tumah in a Kli Eitz. Now, keep in mind that the Torah compares a Kli Eitz, a wooden utensil, to a sock. And a sock is not Makabel Tumah, and therefore Kli Eitz is not Makabel Tumah. But that's only what's called Pshute Kli Eitz. Now, the Misgeret, which is now below the Shulchan, is not a receptacle. It's absolutely flat, but it's large, and it has two sides. And Rabbi Yochanan says that even though Pshute Kli Eitz, a wooden kli without a receptacle, is not makabel tumah because it's not it's dumya desak. It's not dumya desak. Nevertheless, in this case, it's considered like a receptacle, and it's makabel tumah. Why? Because since it's flat on both sides and it can be used on both sides, then it's makabel tumas maga without being a receptacle. And why is that? So I don't know. I don't find it right this second. But apparently, because it's so large and it could be used on both sides, it's like a receptacle. Oh, here he says something here. According to the opinion that the Misgeret was below the Shulchan, and the table was laid down on top of the Misgeret, but again, it wasn't nailed down to the Misgeret. So the tabletop now is a wide, flat slab of wood. Again, later on the Gemara is going to say, but it's mitzupa zav, but we don't know that yet. So Rabbi Yochanan describes this as a slab that can be used on either side, meaning that neither side, although possess a receptacle, but since either side can be used with equal facility, so therefore it's like a receptacle. Now, it's a hanocha pshuta that the shulchan was subject to tumah, to Kabbalah's tumah through maga b'tamei. That we're going to see from a pasuk that says that shulchan atar, meaning it could be makabel tumah. Rabbi Yochanan deduces from the fact that the shulchan could be makabel tumah, and if you hold that the frame, the misgeret, was below the shulchan, a wooden board that's flat on both sides, like the top of the shulchan, is susceptible to tumas maga. Although wooden utensils that lack receptacles, that's called pshute kliates, are generally not susceptible to tumas maga, but a slab that's large, like the tabletop, That's different. For the width and the breadth of its working area are equivalent to a receptacle. Somehow it functions in such a way like a receptacle. Now, how do we know the pshute kliates are not susceptible to tumas maga? That's based on the pasuk in Vayikra Yud Aleph that compares kliates to a sack. The analogy teaches that just like a sack has a receptacle to carry something, so too a wooden utensil must have a receptacle. Rabbi Yochanan is saying that according to this opinion, a wide flat board, as an exception to this rule, even though it's lacking a receptacle and it's a kliates made of wood, nevertheless it's makabel tumah. L'divrei Omer, however, misgarto lemala haisa, then tavla misapeches tiboilecha, right? You don't have any way of concluding anything if you assume, like the other opinion, that the misgeret was on top of the shulchan. You can't deduce anything. Because if the frame was above the tabletop, it was affixed to its outside edge, forming a raised lip at the edge of the tabletop. It was shaped like a hollow box, and it's susceptible to tumas maga because it's shaped like a hollow box, meaning it has a receptacle. So again, you have to know exactly what it looked like if the frame was on top of the shulchan, sort of creating this, he calls it a raised lip at the edges of the shulchan, but in any event, that raised lip makes it into a receptacle. So this doesn't prove anything about a wooden slab that has no receptacle. So the Gemara asks the following: Michal the Shulchan Kibuli Tuma, who write the whole premise of Rabbi Yochanan is that the Shulchan is Makabel Tuma. Why do you say such a thing? We have a rule that in order to be Makabel Tuma, it's got to be Dumya de Sak, and Sak is something that is moved. Whether it's has anything inside of it or it doesn't have anything inside of it. But in the case of the shulchan was not moved. It was stationary. It was always left in the heichal. And kol kli'etz asili nachas, anything that remains in its place, I'm talking about a wooden kli, ain't a makabel tuma. My timer, why not? Because dumya desak be'inam. Masak metaltum oli rekam, af kol metaltum rekam. What is makabel tuma? That's only if it's like a sock that it's carried when it's laden with its objects or when it's empty. Utensils that are not made to be carried, right? It's not metaltel, cannot acquire tumas maga. So therefore, since the shulchan is stationary, always in the heichal, and we never take it out of the heichal, therefore it's not dumi de sak, and it's not metaltel, and it's not makabel tuma. So how could Rabbi Yochanan say that it is makabel tuma? And the answer is because shulchan nami metaltel oli rekam kidreish lakish. This is one of the most famous statements. It looks like an agadita, but the Gemara is using it in a halachic sense. The Yom Reish Lakish, Ma'idich Siv, the pasuk says in Yechezkel, I think. No, I'm sorry. Pasuk says in Vayikra Chav Dalid, Al HaShulchan Atar Mechlal, the Ikatame. From the fact that you describe it with an adjectival word called tar, it means it can't be Makabel Tuma. How could it be Makabel Tuma? It's stationary in its place. This is Reish Lakish's drasha. Malabich Magbinos Holy Ole Regolim. When the Ole Regolim came up to Yerushalayim, they would take out the shulchan. Or I'm not sure exactly if they took it out of the heichal, but Marim Bo'lechem, the people were in the Azara, and they showed them the lechem. They look how beloved you are in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Makom means Hester Panim, but look, you can see through the Hester Panim because the Shulchan was Kisiluko Kach Siduro, Kedivi Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Nes Gadol Nase Belechem Aponim Siluka Kisiduro. That when they took it out a week later, it was hot and fresh as it was when they put it down a week before. Shenemar, as the pasuk says in Shmuel, Lechem losum lechem chom biyom hilokcho. Anyway, they displayed the bread before the Ole Regel to make sure that they would witness this Nes. Anyway, we see that one of the functions of the table is to lift it with the lechem to show it and display it to the Ole Regel. It is regarded as a utensil made to be carried while laden, and therefore can be makabel tuma, and it's dumya disa. Back to Gemara, we'll try to hurry up. Why does Rabbi Yochanan assume that the reason why it's makabel tumah, the shulchan is susceptible to tumah, is because it's a flat surface that can be used on both sides? Forget it. I don't need that. It's not a klietz at all. Why? Typically, mishum tzipui, because the halacha is that the shulchan has to be plated by gold. And if it's plated by gold, Milo Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah in Kalim. Man, if I live long enough to learn Kalim, Kalim is, I think, 35 prakim. I don't know how many. Anyway, this is in the 22nd parak. It says, Shulchan vadulvaki shenivchasu o shechifan b'shayish v'shir behem mokom anochas kosos tmeim. According to Tanakama, even if, let's say, the shulchan was broken or it was covered with marble, but yet there was an area still functional where you could put kosos, it's tame, meaning it still has the original status of a kli. It's still functioning in the way that it was created. But Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it's not enough that it functions for a place for kosos, but rather mokom anochas chatichos. You have to have enough room left on the shulchan after it was reduced to put meat and bread. Room for goblets is not sufficient. Shear in, low shear low. The Mishnah is saying that the Kabbalah's Tumah depends upon shear, meaning that there's enough room, as we said, either for kosos or for chatichos. But low shear, if there's no room left, then it cannot be Makabal Tumah. It doesn't maintain its original status as a kli. Now, in the case of chifan b'shayish, shayish is stone or marble. So if the marble plating is so extensive that there remains no wooden surface large enough, etc., then the shulchan loses its status as a wooden utensil, and it takes on a new status as shayish, as a stone utensil, which is not makabel tumah. So anyway, what do we see from this Mishnah? A plated utensil is identified, it's batel, to the plating. Therefore, the shulchan, which is plated with gold, has the status of a kli mateches. It's not a kli eitz. So the fact that it's makabel tumah, as we derived from Reish Lakish and Shulchan Atar, has nothing to do with the fact that a flat wooden slab is considered like a receptacle and it's makabel tumah. It has to do with the fact that the shulchan was plated with gold. Now the Gemara is going to give 3 or 4 different possible answers and reject all of them. We'll just do maybe 1 or 2 because it's getting late. Maybe there are 2 types of plating. Right? We said that the gold of the plating was not nailed down to the shulchan, and that's called Eino Omed. So maybe the halacha that the Kli eitz is batel to the Maseches only applies when the Maseches is nailed down to the Kli. But in the case of the Shulchan, it's not batel, it doesn't take on the identity of Maseches because it's not nailed down. Let's see if he says anything here. Only, right, the wooden utensils assumes the identity of the plating only if the plating is firmly affixed to it with nails. So the Gemara rejects this. Boy, Minei Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish asked this question to his Rebbe Rabbi Yochanan. B'tzipur omed, b'tzipur sheinem omed, b'shechipa es levizvizin, o shelo chipa es levizvizin. Right, the rim of the table, whether it's covered or not covered, Amalo, Rabbi Yochanan said to him, doesn't make a difference. Loshna tzipa omed, loshna tzipa sheina omed. Loshna chipa es livizvizin, these rims, the loshna lo chipa es rizizin. In all cases, the kli takes on the identity of the plating of the tzipui. So therefore, whether or not the plating is anchored and nailed down, a kli eitz that's covered with metal is regarded as a utensil of metal. It's batel, and it takes on the status of a kli mateches. And therefore, the top of the shulchan, which is plated with gold, is actually considered a kli mateches. So how could Rabbi Yochanan derive the conclusion that an unplated wooden slab that could be used on both sides is considered like a kli kibul and it's susceptible to tumah v'chitem? And now I'll give you another answer. Maybe because of the expensive nature of the wood, and it's a very valuable wood. It's made from atze shitim, which she doesn't translate what that is. But anyway, it's made from a very expensive wood. It never can become batel to its tzipui. So Gemara says that's against Rabbi Yochanan. Why? Because Reish Lakish Diyomar, Rabbi Yochanan is going to say that it all depends upon the value of the wood. But Rabbi Yochanan says any kli, no matter what wood it's made of, whether it's expensive wood like kli shitim or cheaper wood like avskilgus wood, whatever that is, nevertheless, it is always batel to the mateches, to the plating. And therefore, Michael Meimar, Rabbi Yochanan, who holds that the table is susceptible to tum because it's a flat slab of wood. No, forget it. The reason why it's susceptible to tum is because it's subordinate and it's batel to the mateches of the tzipui, even though the shulchan is made of atze shitim, which are very expensive. And therefore, back to the question, how do we derive the conclusion, as Rabbi Yochanan deduces it, from the law that the table the place maybe it's makabel tumah because it's batel to this shani shulchan, and this is the final punchline of the whole sugya of Rabbi Yochanan de Rachmana Karye Eitz. That we have a pasuk in Yechezkel. We go back to that parsha in Yechezkel. It says Hamizbeach. Now it's a long pasuk, but the main point of the pasuk is that the pasuk itself compares the shulchan I shouldn't say compares the shulchan to the mizbeach, but basically the pasuk is going to teach us that the shulchan remains a kli eitz despite the fact that it's plated with metal, which is a chiddush. It's a special halacha with regard to the shulchan. All right, we'll quickly read the pasuk, and then there's a very short agadita here, so we get back to the Mishnah. Hamizbeach eitz, and it's called a mizbeach, even though it's made of eitz. Okay, Sholosh Amos Vaydaber Elai Zeh Shulchan Asher Lifnei Hashem. So the Malach says to Yechezkel Navi, this is the table that's in front of Hashem. So in any event, the Shulchan is called a Just 1 second. The shulchan is called eitz. Now, why is it called eitz? Although it's true that the inside of the shulchan was made of wood, but the outside was plated with metal. So that justifies Rabbi Yochanan's conclusion that the status of the shulchan is that of a kli eitz, even though it was plated with metal with gold. And therefore he derives the conclusion that a flat wooden slab, which can be used on both sides, has the same status as a kli eitz sheyesh bo kibul, and therefore it's makabel tuma. I pasuk mizbech v'sim b'shulchan. There was some sort of reference at the beginning of the pasuk. It says hamizbeach, etc., and then it goes on to the shulchan. Is Rabbi Yochanan Rebbe Lozo Diamid Shavayim Bizman Shveis Hamikdash Kayim Mizbeach Mechaper Ala Adam Achshuv Sheina Mizbeach Hamikdash Kayim Shul Chol Shul Adam Haknosas Orchim is Mechaper Olav. Okay, then. So we'll stop here for the Shabbos daf on Sadi Zayin. Thank you so much for persevering with me, and want to wish you a great Shabbos. Mirz Hashem. We'll get together on Yom Rishon. That would be at noontime, correct? Okay, thank you.